This is my father. I was the youngest of 5 children, and we had to flee for the usual reason of the pogroms that came for them that were of Jewish, not persuasion necessarily, but descent. And we landed in the Bronx, which is now in the part of the Bronx which is now Harlem, which was an exquisite place at the time, tree-lined and so forth. And this was very near, this was 110th Street, something of the sort, very near Central Park and very near the museum, the Metropolitan. This is myself and my 2 brothers, Leo, the French historian, Alexander, the botanist and biologist. And every weekend I was taken to the Metropolitan, and that's where I became interested in art. And we had a great many, came of an intelligentsia type of family, and we had many art books and so forth. But I still have a visual memory of going into the Metropolitan and being confronted by Rembrandt's portrait of his mother paring her nails. And then we went to the zoo very frequently, and that was very, very interesting. And at about the age of 3, I began to draw and never stopped drawing in crayons. And in my day, there were no art classes for children at all. I'm completely and entirely self-taught. And that's what I did, from making children's drawings of people. I began to copy Michelangelo, and Raphael, Rembrandt, Tintoretto, and so forth, and developed a skill in drawing that was quite extraordinary. I was the first one to establish painting, not only doing sculpture in a classic mode, but with great gesture and activity and color. Nobody else, I was the very first one, literally, in that time to introduce color into sculpture. I had no idea of doing sculpture. It was only when I went to the League on a scholarship and wanted to join a painting class and stood in line trying to get register in that class. And there was no room for me. And I turned away in great disappointment, and a very pretty girl, a beautiful little girl in back of me said, "Don't go away, why don't you join the modeling class?" And that was Hannah Small. and we became immediate friends, inseparable. And that's when I began to do sculpture. How much this will interest you. And this is the Art Students League with Alexander Sterling Calder, the father of Sandy Calder, who was our instructor. And above him is the head of Concetta Scaravaglione. Over there is Hannah Small. Over here is Eugenie Gershoy, and a model. And I've forgotten the names of these ladies. And here's myself at a place called City Island off of New York City, diving off a 15-foot pole. At the League, we met Arnold Blanche in one of our classes. I think it was the Boardman Robinson drawing class. And because of Arnold Blanche, a gentleman friend of his came to call, who became my ex-husband. At that time, there was no discussion of future, but because of Arnold and Harry, they had heard of Woodstock and Hervey White's colony of the Maverick, and went up there to see it, and decided that we would go up to Woodstock. I left. I had another scholarship to the League, but I left, and we went to Woodstock. Carl Walters and Helen Walters, Arnold Blanche and Lucille Blanche, and Harry and myself were the original artists who settled in Hervey's colony. His colony had been, before that, restricted to writers and musicians, and he built the wonderful concert hall, which still continues in its remarkable way. Then he decided that he would go in for the visual and plastic arts and invite young people to come and establish a life there and activity, and that's how it happened. We were the original 3 families who went to the Maverick, and Hervey was an extraordinary man, a man of great vision, a man of a writer or an intellectual who had a printing press right in his little wooden house. I was going to not call it a house. However, we decided to stay there. And we lived in summer cottages. We had no light, we had kerosene lamps, we had no water, we had a great 550-foot deep well that we had to pump to get our water. And the reason for the Maverick festivals was the fact that Hervey he was very stubborn. He struck rock, the blue stone that Woodstock is built on practically, and he wouldn't stop until they drilled 550 feet. And in order to pay that off, he had to do something, and that's when he established the Maverick festivals yearly. This is Hervey White at one of the early festivals, and I think these are 3 people having to do Pierre Enroth's wife. Remember the famous violinist, musician? And these are the 3 people associated with the music colony, and this is me. This is Harry driving Roni, Hervey's carriage. Before I began to live with Harry and went to the Maverick. I was at the children's camp. I was a counselor at a children's camp, and that was about 1920 or 1921. 1920, I think. Summer. And that's when I met Harry. Beatrice and I preparing lunch, and two of the kids on the mountain, walking on the mountain. And this is Harry with two of the kids. And here we are at a Maverick festival. And we all decided to go up to Woodstock and didn't want to be wage slaves in New York, and lived life of freedom and opportunity to pursue our work. And Carl Walters immediately built a small studio where he had a kiln. And then he built a kiln, a marvelous outdoor kiln. Arnold and Lucille earned their livelihood by Lucille painted lampshades and did weaving, and Arnold chiefly went hunting for squirrels. And Harry decided that we would make picture frames, gold leaf frames, and that was quite a job to learn how to do that. Harry was a very enterprising guy, and though we lived 3 miles from Woodstock proper and 6 miles there and back walking, he went to Woodstock and became acquainted with some of the famous artists like Spiker and Dasberg and McPhee, etc., 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 and peddled his wares. And we did beautiful frames and carved some of them, and we both worked at them, and that's how we earned our livelihood. Because we were poverty-stricken. We had absolutely nothing. As I say, those houses, we had nothing. We had in the very cold winters, we had outhouses to begin with. We had small drum stoves to heat the place. And fortunately, there were lots of trees about, and not only the men cut the trees down, but Hannah and I and Lucille sawed them on sawhorses. And we had these large tin tubs like this, and that's how we bathed in front of the little drum stoves. And in summer, we bathed by putting a spigot, a faucet, into a pail and hanging it up, and that was the shower. Hannah and I would carve the boulders in the fields and the wood from the trees. I don't know how we got tools and all that sort of thing, but that seems to be unimportant at the moment. But from the sale of the frames and the Blanches from the sale of their lampshades and their weaving, and Carl was already making money selling some of his beautiful pottery, we existed, and we existed well, though other people wouldn't think so. You see, Harry and Arnold and Lucille Blanche and John Flanagan all went to school together in Minneapolis. And after we had settled somewhat in Woodstock, John Flanagan came to stay at the Maverick too. And where he stayed was in, Hervey had a horse called Roney. And since there was nowhere else to put up John lived in Roney's stable. And that was Woodstock. And he it was who showed Hannah and myself, or was influential, didn't show us, in picking up the boulders of the field and carving them. And those were our first forays into sculpture. Oh, these are wonderful. This is me, this is Blake Cabot. This is Harry, and this is me 2 weeks before I had a baby. I hate to say it, but it was the young man who was my doctor. I think it was the first baby he delivered, and he didn't do it right. I should have had a cesarean, and I went for 52 hours in labor and lost the baby. I left in 1935 because Harry and I broke up to begin with. And then there was the WPA, and I immediately had work. And it's on the WPA that I began to establish an entirely different manner of working, outlook. Partially it was because my first assignments were to do work for children. I did animals for children's housing projects, and they were made in small. The first thing I did was a camel that made me completely famous immediately. It was a snooty camel. I was always associated with children. These things that I made, animals of all sorts, were sent out all over the country. In general, our work was allocated all over the country. And then we were given the freedom to choose our own assignments. And I saw in one of the mural painter's murals of what he called puppets in various activities. And so I was so entranced with them that I thought to myself, well, I'll do things to go along with these. And that's when I began to do these mad, Alas, after I lost that, that was cut off. I was invited to Yado. You've heard of Yado? In Saratoga Springs. It's like the MacDowell colony. I was invited to Yado, and there I did some figures, some little models. A man who influenced me, not in his work, which I admired enormously, was Anton Refriger. And we liked one another because we were Russians anyhow. And he got a commission. There was a man who started a restaurant called Cafe Society downtown. And he had no money whatsoever, and he asked artists to contribute the decor for their food. Ref was doing the murals for them, and Ref said, I want you to do figures for them. So what was I going to do as figures for them? What theme? I was going to do the theme of what the cafe represented. Music, food. I haven't got the other things here. Music, food, dance, and boisson, the drink. The lady who was represented boisson was so drunk, she was burping, that she had burped her head clear off her shoulders. Kind of humor I had. And this is what I did, one of the things I did for Cafe Society. That was Cafe Society downtown, which was on Grove Street. This is called, there were saints in ancient times who sat on columns in the desert doing penance for their sins. Dorothy Thompson, Walter Lippmann, who wrote newspaper columns, and somebody, Sokolsky, who wrote a newspaper column. And they're sitting on their own newspaper columns, which I actually put on there, doing penance for their sins. Cafe Society was closed down by the Un-American Activities Committee, and nobody knows what happened to these things. Wonderful black music, Hazel Scott, all kinds of people were introduced there. the best black musicians and other musicians, the dance, the decor in general, the food, but Mr. Hoosiers, that hateful creature, decided that it was communist. I had to figure out how I could keep working. I'm a loner. No, I expect in the telling, it sounds very fascinating, because it was very fascinating, and I made many, many, many friends. And, but I was never able to pursue a real career. These papier-mâché things were done because I had no money for materials. After I lost my job on the WPA and didn't know what to do with myself, and had no means of earning a livelihood, Miriam, who was at Yado with me, was going to New Orleans to do figures for the Mardi Gras. And she said, "Why don't you come along?" And I did. And that's why I was in New Orleans. And unfortunately, we never did the figures for the Mardi Gras because the war intervened, Pearl Harbor. So we then went on to San Francisco. And I now get a pension of $106 for the San Francisco school system and $150 from the state system. And that's my pension for 20 years of teaching, in which I almost killed myself having to fire the kilns, teach people glazing, teach people pottery, whatever. Interested? Very hard life. But weekends, I made all my creatures. Weekends, I did all my painting. Weekends, I did all my drawing. So I had a really very interesting life, I might say. Then it came time for me to retire. And was I to keep on at a half-time job in Unified School District? Oh no, I wanted to come home. And I came to the Chelsea, but I had no way of earning a livelihood, except that I got a job uptown at the YWCHA, the Women's Hebrew Association, which is a fabulous place now, and taught the old folks there. Then I thought I couldn't decide whether to stay in New York or whether to go back to San Francisco on a half-time basis or something of the sort. And I made an arrangement to take a flight back to San Francisco, and I went down to the desk and began to cry while I was waiting for the taxi. And the gentleman at the desk, one of the owners of Chelsea, said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "I'm going back to San Francisco, and I don't want to." And he said, "Don't go to San Francisco. Stay with us here. We want you here. You will be one of us." When I was teaching in California, one of the projects was to teach at a hospital called the Laguna Honda Home for the Aged and Infirm. And I was asked to work with a group of men who had a separate location, I would call it, of their own. And they were chiefly poor derelicts and drunks. And this was, we had started a modeling class, an art class for them, sculpture chiefly, to keep them afloat because they were drinking all the time and throwing themselves out of the window. And to entice them, they were told that they would have an egg for breakfast. Well, those men came and said, "What are we making mud pies for?" And look what they did. Ancient Negro who was going to make something. I said, "Make something from your life." And this is a mama possum with 2 babies. People who had never touched clay didn't know what it meant. And the color was, or am I mistaken? They were extraordinary things. My doctor had warned me. He said, "You're now obviously not in full command of your strength, and you're old, and you've got to be careful of what goes on in the street." And I was approached by a street crime group who do something called the bag drop. A black lady followed me about and began to ask me questions about the Chelsea. And I said I was going shopping. And she said, don't bother me. I don't know you. I don't know what you're talking about. I went to the shopping center and did my shopping, and there she was, and she followed me again towards 23rd Street. And as she was walking, I told her to get away from me. And as she wouldn't. She kept chatting. And as we were walking, a large black man quickly ran in front of me, in front of us, and dropped a bag. And I, idiot, said, "Oh, he has dropped his purse," or something of the sort. By that time, he was across the street. I picked it up, and I think it had $30,000 in it, or not real, but something of the sort. This happened in front of the betting place, the off-bet place. And somehow she persuaded me to report this to the police down in the lobby of the Chelsea. How did it happen after that? And she said, we have to, from her conversation, we have to hear what the police have to say, so why don't I come up with you and wait to hear what the results are? And she just stayed, and she stayed here. And the man who was at the head of this, they talked on the phone all the time. I can't describe it to you. I couldn't get away. They said, "You will have to stay here where you are we are in control of you." And they stayed for 3 and tried to get money out of me. And I had some money in my trunk, very little, but enough. And they thought they got all kinds of information from me, or they had seen me. They had watched me, you see, and thought I was a likely subject. And they knew that I banked right here at the Immigrant Bank. And they thought they would get out of me how much I had, how it was. This was a weekend, you see. This would all have happened in one day if it hadn't been a Saturday and a Sunday. So they had to wait till the Monday to get me to the bank again. Well, I had an appointment at St. Vincent's Hospital that Monday morning, and they knew it, and they knew that I had to get there, or I had an appointment with the doctors. And I got away. I got to the hospital, and a friend met me there, and I told her what had happened, and she said, "You must report this immediately." And they got the detectives of crimes against the elderly right in St. Vincent's Hospital, and accompanied me here and showed me what it was all about. And I've never heard from them again. They said they showed me
mugshots.
Thank you. And they said I couldn't recognize her. And they said, "We'll get her, and they'll get 5 years for grand larceny." They never came again, and that's why I got that special lock, you see. But I'm so ashamed of my stupidity and my innocence and my unrealism about the world. I told this to the people in Woodstock, and Hannah said, "Woo!" And I said, "Hannah, I didn't understand." No, Chelsea was a very different place. It didn't look like this in my day, our day. We have nothing now. We used to have a housekeeper. We had drapes, we had windows washed, we had linen furnished us. We had housemen who would build shelves and do all kinds of things. Everything changes, as we know. But I'm very, very happy that I stayed here. It was marvelous. I had great parties here in the early days when everybody still lived here. But c'est la vie, ça. It changes. Early in San Francisco in the 40s, I was enchanted by all the Chinese art. Good heavens, what we had there. And the folk art. And I think a great many of my things are literally folk art. And why that particular theme, I don't know. I was interested not only in mobile creatures, but a whole piece of sculpture that would be moving. Does that make sense to you? Why did we do this? Oh, we were going to... Well, usually I have all those things from the Deutsche Gallery about, and I dust them with a feather duster, and I put plastic wrappings around them. I don't lead a normal life right now. How can I explain to you?
My father came to this country when he was in his early 20s, put himself through college. My mother was born in this country. My mother is a Nisei, and she was born in California. And I was born December 4th, and Pearl Harbor was bombed December 6th. And we had 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 months, I'm not really sure, to dispose of all of our things and be relocated. And I spent, and I'm not sure about this either, Jean, the Japanese are so passive about that whole period that my generation was told very little about it. It was something really to be ashamed of. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I'm furious. Rich American families sponsored Japanese families. My father worked as a gardener for the Charles P. Tafts. And room and board was provided. But they were really servants to the Tafts. And when they had saved enough money to go out on their own, they did.
They could leave, so it was really a step then to get you.
And my father chose to do that because he didn't really know how he was going to get work. Feelings against the Japanese ran so high that unemployment was, there was no work for the Japs. There just wasn't. So that was the first step, and then my father was recruited by Army Intelligence to go with the occupation forces as an interpreter.
He was recruited?
And he decided to do that. He felt, my father was very patriotic in a weird kind of way to both countries. He loved this country. Japan was his home, and he felt that it was his obligation as not to be corny, but as a citizen of the world, to do something to make relations easier between this country that he chose and his homeland. And so he was there for a couple of years working as an interpreter. Growing up in a country where you really do look different, where in a crowd your face stands out as different, it's not easy to hide. And during the war years and post-war years, there was so much anti-Japanese feeling that I'm sure the Chinese were singled out too, just because of our faces.
Oriental.
I didn't label myself artist, but I was always painting and drawing probably from the time I was a year old. Maybe even earlier. I always wanted to paint and draw, and my parents were very encouraging. So there was always art supplies for me, and not art lessons, but the supplies were always there. I use a lot of pencil and a lot of this is oil crayon in the pictures because I love the feeling of the hand being in there. And if it's for me personally, I like paintings that don't look a little awkward. I have a Karen Steinloff painting and the egg is a little off. And that's why I love it, because it looks like a person painted the egg. It's not a photograph of an egg. Even photographs that are a little distorted and show the hand, a human hand in there, are appealing to me. And I paint abstract painting because that's what I like. It doesn't interest me to paint pictures of trees.
Paintings of atmosphere.
And I use my hands a lot. It's like finger painting almost. Because if you use your hand, it looks like your hand is there. It's like handcrafted furniture. If it's done on a lathe, that's what it's going to look like. But if it's been hand done, it's going to show that too. started out as an actual physical thing. I had several big mirrors in the studio, and when we redid this floor, they were propped in the window. And there was a mirror on this wall, a mirror sitting on the ledge of this window. And I love the idea that the landscape was bouncing back and forth in all these squares. And that's what started a certain image that continues to proliferate. Then the mirrors got hung back on the walls where they belong, but the image was still in my head. And in a very, I had forgotten about that, but in a real way, that's still what I'm painting. But now that I'm thinking, I think that I spent a lot more time on all the tiny little things that were happening even in the abstract paintings. Maybe it's just, maybe I'm just not as patient as I was. I don't know. You know, I'm not interested in doing that anymore.
Maybe you're more comfortable, maybe you're freer.
Yeah, maybe.
What do you think?
What I find though is that I like painting more now than I did then. It's always a struggle, but somehow I do feel freer. I just enjoy painting a whole lot more than I did then. There was a feeling that I should paint 10 years ago, that I had invested so much time and so much energy that I should paint. Now I feel like I just like to do it.
And now you have more recognition. You have your own gallery in the city.
That's true. But even without that recognition, Jean, I would always paint because it gives me pleasure. I mean, my paintings are all self-portraits, and they're all pictures of my house and the woods and the feelings that I get from living up here. I couldn't paint the same pictures if I lived in Soho, and I wouldn't want to live in Soho. I find it amazing that people can live in the city, in that awful, dreadful slum, and be able to produce beautiful works of art. It's funny because I started this ad and I thought, I'm going to do everything in red because that'll really grab them. And that's not what I was thinking. Yeah, and the red kept getting paler and paler, and the first painting I did, I just ripped off the canvas. It was awful because I was fighting myself, you know. That's not
People sometimes buy them as a series?
Mostly people buy them as a series.
It's beautiful.
You know, it's funny. It's like my feeling about Karen. I love Karen Steinloff's work, and I always knew at some point I'd like to have one of her paintings. And then I walked into Misty's, and that painting that was on the wall, it was gray and soft, and it spoke to me the way none of the others did. That you know, you can really respect an artist's body of work, but there will be maybe one or two that are just for you. Well, as a woman, that's the hardest one because in a funny kind of way, as I get older, I feel less like a woman than just a person. I mean, I feel almost androgynous in a funny kind of way, that I'm less concerned with all those things that I thought defined woman when I was young. They're just not issues for me anymore. I just do what I do. That a lot of things that I do are not particularly feminine, and they're not particularly womanly. That in conventional terms, I would think I'm just a person. Not, you know.
And your influence, do you feel as you get older, more Japanese influence, more American, or does that become less important also?
No, it's very funny because for a lot of years when I was young, and not just a young woman but a youngster, I denied the Japanese in me so. And then when I was in college, went nuts trying to rediscover all those things, wanting my father to teach me to speak Japanese when he wanted to, when I was 8 or 9, and he wanted me to speak Japanese. I refused to. It set me apart, and I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And then when I was about 18 or 19, I wanted to speak Japanese. Well, it was really too late. And the Japanese that I understand is so elementary. I mean, it's, you know, family talk, because my family still does speak Japanese at home. And I understand what they're saying, but they don't say anything terribly profound at home. Pass the salt. Is it warm enough for you to wear your coat? But I'm not alone. I spoke to a young woman who was born in a relocation camp. Her parents sent her to Japan after the war for a year, and she still doesn't speak Japanese. She said she resisted it so, that she didn't want to go to Japan, and she didn't want to speak Japanese. I think that we spend our whole lives struggling to find out who we are and how we've gotten to be what we are. You win a few, you lose a few, you know? And my father was wonderfully encouraging for me in my art, more than my mother. And I'm an only child. And it seems that I grew up with this continual battle of be passive or you won't get a good man, but do the best you can. You know? And what do you do with that? You know, when you're 15 or 16, what do you do with that?
What every woman of every age has.
My father, who was a Buddhist, sent me to church. Not because he was a religious man, but because because I was always energetic and active and pushing the limits. And that's not really very nice for a Japanese girl. And, I mean, he really would have liked to have calmed me down a bit, so he sent me to church. That was supposed to quiet me down, so that when I grew up, I would be quiet enough to get a good husband. If I was too opinionated, nobody would want me. So he said, I mean, this is hilarious. He sent me to church, and it became one more thing to rebel against. You know, I mean, it didn't work.
And where did you meet that good man? And where did you meet that good man? In church?
Right.
And where did you meet Eric?
I met Eric at Pratt. We were, no, we weren't in the same department. We were for a while. And then, because I had started out in graphic arts and illustration, and decided that I didn't want any part of that crass commercial advertising world. Now I'm beginning to see that with galleries in New York, it's big business too.
Exactly.
You know, and it's all the same thing, really.
It's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And what?
It really is.
How does one avoid it? You continue to paint for yourself, I think.
Yeah, and I guess I've been lucky. I mean, I've been very lucky in that we have the frame shop that earns our living. So what I've done with my painting is up to me, and
That's wonderful.
and I haven't had to depend on it to earn a living. If I had to, I might have done very different things. I don't know, but because I haven't been required to sell the paintings to make money to live, it's freed me up in a lot of ways. So I have continued to paint what I want to paint.
And then despite all that, you sell. Now you're popular, right? You selling?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And you have one child,
yeah.
and he's in college.
He's in college. He's a graphic design major at the
Is that
Rhode Island
right?
School.
Is that right?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
very
He sees
good.
how we live, and he wants it better. Motherhood and my painting was a conflict in the early years, and I made a real decision that motherhood came first. And I did try for the first couple of years when Mark was little to paint and to take care of him, and it was so frustrating, and I realized that both were suffering, and he was suffering more than the painting, certainly, and that he was more important to me. And so for a lot of years I didn't paint. I didn't really start painting again seriously until he started first grade. And that was a choice, And I don't regret for a minute having done that. I think that that was in my life one of the smartest things I ever did. And he was fun.
And
He was
also
a lot
creative.
of fun. Yeah, and he was a different kind of creativity. Material things. I mean, you know, you look at this house and you think, wow, but we worked very hard on it.
Right.
And it didn't cost a lot of money to build. And yeah, we've not been able to do the kind of traveling that we would have liked to, or to have the things, materially the things that, say, a middle-class couple might have had. It's less and less important to me. When I was younger, I had this feeling of, well, if I can't have that couch, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to live without that beautiful couch. And I really could care less now. You know, so I think that I'm doing what I want to do. And I'm not being smug about it.
Right.
I'm just,
But did you like
I'm taking, I mean, I take the bad along with the good, and I'm just doing what I want to do. I think that the whole art world is changing anyway, and I think that young artists are not wanting to be part of a group, or not. I mean, the media will link them still as the Italians today are painting in a certain way, or this new German expression. But I don't think that those people like to hang out at the Cedar Bar and discuss art. And I find that with most of the artists up here who are, oh, and I say young, I mean in their 30s and 40s, are really rather reclusive. You know, we work in our own studios, meet each other for dinner or lunch, not talk about art very much. Look at each other's work from time to time, but it's not so formal as it was during that period of the 50s when the abstract expressionists were such a league. You know, they seemed to want to be strong as a group. And I don't see that happening today. And I think Woodstock is just a microcosm of that.
And do you think that your painting has been affected by living in Woodstock, the physical surroundings of Woodstock?
Yes. Oh,
yes.
Without a doubt.
And this mountain particularly?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. And I think about it all the time. I mean, my paintings are all self-portraits, and they're all pictures of my house and the woods and the feelings that I get from living up here.
When you picked this lot, you had to clear it?
It was dense, dense woods, Jean, and the three of us, Mark was about 5 or 6, and literally the three of us came up with hand saws and what are those thistle things called, and we cleared a path to put in a driveway. And
did you camp up here when you were doing
Yes,
that?
we did. Well, that's not fair. Mark and Eric did. And after a week of rain and 3 wet cats and a wet dog in a tent, I couldn't bear it. So I went down and stayed with my mother.
Yeah. Who designed the house?
We all did. Eric's father was an architect, and he began the design on it, and then he got sick. So Eric and I continued it, and the house kind of evolved as we grew. Well, I tend to lead life a day at a time, so I can't make any grand projections into the future. I could say what I said to Harriet. Harriet Tannen asked me for a quote, and she said, and I said, oh, I don't know, and I said this, and she said, oh, that's good, I'm going to write it down. So I'll share it with you. That for me, painting is like a love affair. Sometimes you love it, and sometimes you hate it, but it's there.
Very nice. Thank you.
And the house, you know, the house was built really for Mark. The idea that
Well, you could give it to him.
Eric didn't need it so much as I did emotionally, a base, because I had never had a house or a base. We had moved around so much that when we had Mark, I said, Eric, we've got to stop cracking around. You know, we really have to provide stability for him, because I know how, with stability, you can do anything in the world.
You can go free once you've had it.
That's
I
right.
doubt that you can ever be
Be
free
free
if
that you
haven't
haven't had it, that's right.
I wonder
right.
about that.
And I feel that for myself, I will never be the free kind of person that Mark is. I mean, Mark is very easily, he can sleep anywhere, he can go anywhere, he can travel anywhere and feel just comfortable, because he's always known that he's
Security
got
in the
home, that he can come home if he wants. And when you don't know that,
and security in the beginning,
Yeah.
where he was comfortable with both of you,
Yeah.
talked to both of you and everything. Not like Lon's one.